In this episode of Alien Agenda, Colonel Gene takes a detour from UFOs to welcome Tony, a multifaceted author known for his work on the Jersey Devil, the Simpsons comics, and jokes for politically incorrect. Tony dives into his Pineys book series, exploring South Jersey's rich folklore, including the Jersey Devil legend and Revolutionary War history. He shares how a middle school book report sparked his fascination with the Pine Barrens, supernatural tales, and discusses his creative journey across genres. Join us for an engaging conversation about folklore, history, and storytelling.
Hi folks, it's Colonel Gene with another edition of Alien Agenda. Today we're going to deviate just a bit from our UFO theme to interview a truly fascinating man, Tony DiGerolamo. Many of you may know about Tony from his many books about the Jersey Devil, or his work with the Simpsons comic books, or possibly you've heard some of his jokes with Bill Maher on his show Politically Incorrect. Tony is, however, best known for his many appearances all over New Jersey talking about how to hunt the devil, and his book, Pineys. Tony, it is truly a pleasure to welcome you today to Alien Agenda.
Thanks for having me here.
Let me ask you, what is it you appreciate about the Pineys? I mean, it's an interesting series, and I'd like to hear what is it that really turns you on about that?
Well, I love the Pineys book series because it allows me to write all about the South Jersey folklore and history of not only the Jersey Devil, but the other folk tales and a lot of the history in South Jersey. I'm a big fan of reading about the bandits who lived here during the Revolutionary War. South Jersey was pretty important to the war effort. We made the cannonballs that were used during we made them out of bog iron in places like Batstow. And, the Brits came down here and tried to burn out some of the villages that were involved in the bog iron industry at the time. So it's kind of a fascinating thing for me because a lot of those ruins are still out in the Pine Barrens today.
Well, that's interesting because, as it turns out, one of my forebears, Jonathan Oliphant, raised a company during the American Revolution, and his plantations over in Burlington County, Oliphant Mills.
Oh, neat.
And some time ago, I went over to see his old house, which was up for sale. It's very interesting, the history. I enjoy it like you do. What really got you interested in the first place for these supernatural characters that you have in your books?
Well, when I was in middle school, I needed a book report, and I was looking for the shortest book in the library, and I saw the red spine of the Jersey Devil book, so I read that. This is the 1974 book with written by McCloy and Miller, so that got me started. It really goes into the Jersey Devil legend and some of the companions of the Jersey Devil. There's the headless ghost pirate. The story goes that Captain Kidd buried his treasure in the Jersey Pine Barrens and beheaded one of his men so the ghost would guard the treasure. So that's one of the companions of the Jersey Devil, the headless ghost pirate. And I put him in, I did a comic book based on the Jersey Devil back in the 90s. And the Jersey Devil is sort of an anti-hero, and the headless ghost pirate was his companion in the early issues.
Can you give us an idea a little bit about what is the Jersey Devil? Where did it come from, and where did that whole lore originate?
So the basic story goes something like this. In the 1730s, there was a woman named Leeds, we called her, and she was the 13th child in her family, and she had 13 children. And on a windswept night in the pines, she was giving birth to her 13th child, and she cried out, "Curse this child, let the devil take it." And thus the Jersey Devil was born, a horrible monster that ate the family, flew out the chimney, and has been haunting the Pine Barrens ever since. Now that's the basic story, and then there's all sorts of variations on it. McCloy and Miller, I was lucky enough to meet before they passed, and I asked them, had they done any research into the Jersey Devil, in terms of the Leeds family and any actual historical evidence, and they had. And they told me what they did was they went back in time, looked through the records, and found the family Bible of the Leeds, a couple named Deborah and Japhet Leeds, and they lived on Moss Mill Road, right across from Smithville in Leeds Point. And if you look in their family Bible, and people would write their name and their spouse's name and then their children underneath, they had a listing for 12 names and a 13th space that was blank. So I said, what was the blank space? They said, well, it could have been they intended to have a 13th child but never did, or they had a 13th child but it died in childbirth, very not uncommon in the 1700s. But their theory was they did have a 13th child, but it was born severely handicapped. And in the 1700s, what would they have said? They would have said that child's touched by the devil. It would have been a family scandal. They would have hidden the child away from prying eyes, maybe not taken it to church to be baptized, and thus keeping it into the house, keeping it in the house. And then, the Leeds had servants because they had wealth and influence, and they would, take care of it, but they would keep it as a secret. But the servants would have eventually said something, and people at this time would gather in taverns and they would gossip and whisper down the lane. You probably get the legend of the Jersey Devil. And there was another major factor in all this, and I'm sort of summarizing my whole spiel here. It's about an hour, but at that time, the Leeds family didn't have a great reputation because Daniel Leeds, the patriarch of the Leeds family, was the sort of officer for the king at this time. And we were split into East and West Jersey as provinces. And Daniel was the officer for West Jersey, so you had to go to him to fill out the British Empire paperwork for whatever it is you wanted to do, if you wanted to hunt or have a farm or whatever. And people naturally resented him because of his wealth and influence. There was also, he had a falling out with the Quakers because he wrote a controversial book on angels and devils. And so the family itself was having issues. They also published an almanac that was very popular. And at that time, Ben Franklin was a young printer in Philadelphia. He also had an almanac called Poor Richard's Almanac, very famous now. But back then, no one had heard of it, and he wanted their business. Now, he saw the problems the Leeds were having with the Quakers, and he piled on. He implied that they were involved in witchcraft because they had astrology in their almanac. He even announced the death of Titan Leeds, son of Daniel, who was the publisher at the time. He, of course, wasn't dead, but that day and year passed, and everybody said, Franklin, he's not dead. Franklin said, yes, he is dead. It's his ghost writing the almanac. You probably shouldn't read it. You should read my wholesome Poor Richard's Almanac. So you had all these, perfect storm of stuff that would have driven this rumor about this 13th child and what a monster it was, and the connection to witchcraft, and whisper down the lane, you probably get the legend of the Jersey Devil.
I guess what you're saying, people haven't changed much, have they?
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, let me tell you, I ask you, you're a dog lover, is that right?
Sure, I got a dog.
What kind is it?
I have a Bichon Maltese.
That's interesting. I used to have a
little one.
Yep, I had a Maltese for 18 years. We now have 2 Cavalier King Charles. They're great dogs, but oh my God, the hair all over the house. Being an author, a screenplay writer, a public figure, which of the things gives you the most pleasure or the most satisfaction?
I love going out to shows and selling the books and talking to fans, Ran into a fan one time who had read the Pineys, and he said, one of the characters' name is Hemingway, and he said, Hemingway is like the greatest character ever created. And I was like, wow, that's really nice of you to say, thanks. I also get fans who tell me, personal stories connected to the Jersey Devil or their ancestry in South Jersey. So I have one fan who, she traced her lineage back through the Leeds family and then beyond, and found a relative with the last name Elwell, who was arrested for witchcraft in 1692. And she sent me the link to the arrest warrant, and you could read it there in the archives, and it was really interesting to see. And so the relative was arrested for witchcraft somewhere in South Jersey, and then she said she was eventually let go because they decided they wouldn't hold witch trials anymore in that town.
So I assume that the genre that you like best is the fantasy genre?
Well, I like the supernatural,
Supernatural.
These days, I guess they call it more urban fantasy. I don't know. I just try to write my own thing. I think the South Jersey folklore has a sort of unique flavor to it, and that's why I focus on that. You know, I often struggle trying to classify my books online because they often ask you, oh, okay, what kind of book is it? And I say it's got comedy and horror, but it's got supernatural elements, but it's not really fantasy, although there's magic in it. So it's kind of hard to classify, you know, it's kind of its own thing.
Well, I certainly can relate to what you're saying, because I too have written in a number of genres, and I got a pleasure from writing in all of them, actually. Tell me a little about when you worked on the comic books for the Simpsons.
Oh, that was a lot of fun. I was a big fan of the show back then. I used to watch it all the time. And I worked for Bongo Comics, and what they would do is, you know, that Matt Groening himself actually ran Bongo. He, you know, at heart was a cartoonist and kept the print rights to The Simpsons after his, you know, first deal. And at that time, Fox didn't really care about that kind of stuff. They didn't know The Simpsons was going to be as big as it was. And my understanding is Matt actually owned several different merchandising rights outside of the United States as well. So he had merchandise for The Simpsons in places like Canada that you really couldn't get here. I went to Canada one time and went to a Simpsons store and found all this other Simpsons merchandise I had never seen. It's all here now, but back then it was kind of forbidden. But writing for the comic was different because it was writing comedy, and a lot of the comics today, it's all superhero based, and we were just talking about that before the show. Not very good stuff. But back then, you know, you have to have your comedy ducks in a row to really write for The Simpsons, and I would put the old comics against the old show any day. So sometimes I would get a note back, CBF, which the editor meant could be funnier, and I would have to go back and sort of rework the joke and get it up to par, as it were. And that was the only time I ever got those kinds of notes. Even on Bill Maher, when I wrote jokes, I didn't get CBF. So it was a lot of fun, and towards the end, they loosened the restrictions up on writing stories. Initially, we weren't allowed to write parody stories because they did a lot of that on the show, and it was like kind of too easy to do and too easy to conflict with stuff that was on the show, and they didn't want the comics to be the same as the show. In fact, one time I sent in a story, and they approved it, but then had to turn around and say, no, it turns out they're doing an episode almost just like this, so we can't do this one. But so towards the end, they finally opened it up to parody. So one of my last stories was for the Treehouse of Horror, which we did as a separate comic. And so it was a parody of the Ghostbusters with Homer, Frank, Lenny, and Carl as the Ghostbusters. And so that was a huge story for me. So I really enjoyed that.
Now, you didn't draw the cartoons themselves, though, did you?
No, I wrote the stories, and they had other guys do the art. I don't do art.
No, I can't draw anything.
Yeah, I don't have the patience, man. Those guys can just draw and all day long.
Well, I don't have the talent. I just don't do it. Tell me about your with politically incorrect with Bill Maher. I mean, that's so different than The Simpsons, and so different than the...
Well, when I was in college, I had a friend. We worked on a comedy show together, and he went on to become the warm-up comic for Bill Maher. And that's, you know, in most shows they'll have a warm-up comic come out and tell some jokes to the crowd, kind of loosen them up. So when the actual host comes out to tell jokes, the crowd will, you know, easy for them to laugh. And so I got in like that, and what we would do, and this is the late 90s, we would fax in our jokes, and I'd fax in about 24 jokes. They would shoot 2 episodes on, I think, Tuesdays and Thursdays. They only shot 4 a week. And so you would try to get the most timely news stories and write a joke about it. The only downside for the show was they pointed us to the same avenues of news stories. And so a lot of times we would do, you know, great minds think alike. a lot of guys would write the same joke, and the show would have to pay 3 times for the same joke.
Oh,
But one of my jokes was the author of the Hokey Pokey died today, and they buried him, but they had a lot of problems because, of course, when they put his left foot in, his left foot fell out, and then his right foot fell in, and then it shook all about. And see, and that was the joke. And there were a lot of like timely jokes like that based on news stories.
well, you certainly would have a lot of material today.
True.
Tell me this, what advice have you received that you think has helped you get where you are?
Well, yeah, I tell young writers to, no one's going to do it for you. A lot of people, they write stories or they try to get into something creative, and they think another entity will come out of the clouds and rain money down upon them, and it'll solve their problems. It doesn't work that way. You have to make your own success, and a lot of the people who are very successful, that's what they do. They work very hard, and they just keep pushing what they're doing until finally, they are making money or they are surviving or however they do it, and eventually, people come to you and then say, oh, we see you're doing very well here, we would like to get into business with you, that sort of thing. So a lot of persistence that I tell writers, and some people can do it and some people just can't. They don't really want to write, they just want all the kudos of writing. So writing stories is kind of lonely. You use a lot of time by yourself thinking and thinking and thinking and then writing stuff. So it's not for everybody, but for the people who want to do it, it's there, and you just gotta work on your skills and keep your nose to the grindstone, as they say.
I agree. I like to go out and talk with people about my books, especially some if they've read some of them, and talk with them. I think it's. What is your favorite writer?
I liked Kurt Vonnegut. I liked a lot of his books. I liked his, world building, kind of weird, quirky world building that he did in his novels. I like Hunter S. Thompson because I like the sort of driving force of his narrative and how the words just sort of cascade into the next paragraph. Who else? I like a lot of comic writers I used to read. I used to love John Ostrander. He used to write a comic called Grim Jack, which was a comic that took place in a city called Cynosure, which was the intersection of every possible dimension and universe. And so anything could happen in Cynosure. On one street, there could be magic, and the other street, there could be robots and science fiction. And it was a really interesting concept, had a lot of heady concepts to it, and really a great run of comics back in the 80s at first. I also like Mike Barron. He wrote The Badger and Nexus, and he still writes a lot of comics today.
Well, that's interesting because in some of my sci-fi books, we look at how, for instance, you can move the tremendous distances in space with wormholes, but the other concept is that there are simultaneous dimensions that exist, and the possibility of being able to move between those dimensions it tweaks my imagination. So it's a fascinating area, and you're right. When you're writing, you're sort of alone in your desk, thinking about what you're doing. But again, then when you can take those ideas and see them in the book and see people enjoy them, I think it's rewarding.
Yeah, and with the dimensional stuff, in book 12 of the Pineys, I was able to do a sci-fi thing because in Ong's Hat, they say interdimensional portals open up in and around Ong's Hat. So I was able to do this story in which the characters travel to different dimensions and different versions of the Pine Barrens. And I also decided that since they were traveling through different dimensions, move at a different pace in time, so they're able to go back to the 70s in one version of the Pine Barrens, which is very exciting for one of the characters because all the prices are low and he can fill his gas tank. And you can do a lot with a little,
Well, let me ask you this. What is your personal opinion about the existence of intelligent life? Do you think this is a basis is in reality? You think this is possible?
Sure. I don't know if we'll ever see it. I mean, I think if intelligent life came here, we'd probably be in big trouble because the technology to get here is incredible. You know, we don't quite have it yet. We're sort of on the verge of it, but we don't quite have the sort of technology that we could travel light years away and actually, you know, still be alive when we got there. Maybe we can set up a now that might get there, and then our ancestors could be at the Alpha Centaurian. But so another civilization coming here would probably be a disaster for us. You know, it would be like the Europeans, discovering the new world. They'd just be like, oh, get out of our way, primitives. This is our planet now. Yeah, I think it's out there. But I also think, you know, space is so vast. The chances of us running into anybody right now is going to be very slim because we are very much limited to our own tiny little corner of the galaxy. And, it'll take a few millennia, I think, for us to get out there and actually meet another civilization.
Well, I always thought that if in fact we are being visited, and I think that's very possible, it depends on how they decide to make themselves known. You know, they might be looking at us like we look at a beehive because of their intellect compared with ours. They may be reasoning that we've developed to a point where maybe they can make some intelligent conversation with us. And then, of course, there's the third scenario, like in War of the Worlds, where they come in anger. And I agree with you, then we're in big trouble.
Yeah, and it could be that we aren't even seeing them. We're just seeing their equivalent of a drone that they've sent out. And, when you think about the vast distances of space, we're talking millions of light years, their civilization could be long dead, right? Like somebody could get our Voyager probe, a million years from now and say, oh, look at all these guys. They probably live out there in the galaxy. And by the time they get here, we're all gone or dead,
Well, you know what I told my daughter before they released my last book, Are They Out There? I said, please get it out on the market before they land.
Yes.
What do you see as your writing legacy?
With the Pineys, I think that's going to be it for my legacy, because it's all the South Jersey folklore, and my hope is that it's going to keep that as a weird fictional record of it, so people can learn about it and know that it existed, even though it's a fictional account of it. It's a way to learn it sort of quickly and then do more research. And so, for instance, I was just writing about a bar for the next book. And in Clementon, there was a bar called Mitchell's Tavern, and it was in the middle of a junkyard, and it's gone now. But I created a bar that's very similar to Mitchell's Tavern, a fictional one, for the story where one of the characters go there for a beer. And I described basically what Mitchell's Tavern used to look like. And it was a very piney bar, It was in the middle of a junkyard, and it had, on the inside, it was really crowded. They had a pool table. There was barely enough room to play pool. And then there were like license plate and car parts all over the bar as sort of decoration.
Well, Tony, I really want to thank you for being with us today. You're a fascinating individual, just as your writing is. I wish you the very best, and please keep in touch.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. Take care.